Good morning, everybody. Caitlin, do we have my slide?
Sorry, you were a little quiet there. What was that?
I asked if you're advancing slides, if we have my slide.
Oh, you want to put that up now? Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Maya, could you please pull up the last slide I sent you?
So everybody, my name is Joe Cimino. I'm the New Jersey Administrative Commissioner. I'm chair of the Horseshoe Crab Management Board. And I'm, was working on designing a 2020 logo with ASMFC staff because New Jersey is going to be hosting. The good news there is that we think we will be able to be hosting in person in 2021, which is the 80th year of the ASMFC annual meeting. So a little bit of disappointment, but also going to be pretty exciting. One other thing that bums me out about this in particular is that I'm not going to get a chance to spend some time with Dr. John Sweeko, the Fish and Wildlife Service, who hopefully is joining us virtually. John will walk us through some agenda items. So I don't know if we can advance some of the slides here. But I did design a new 79th annual meeting logo for us all, for our socially distanced and new virtual reality that we're all living with here. So I just wanted to start out, hopefully get a few smiles from folks again. The bright side of this for us in New Jersey is that hopefully we'll get another crack at this next year. Okay, so we can move on to the agenda, Caitlin. And I will attempt to look at our most up-to-date version of this. So first is approval of the agenda. Does anyone have any additions or corrections they feel need to be made to the agenda? Anyone on the board?
I see no hands, Joe.
Very good. Thanks, Tony. We'll consider that approved by consent. Next is approval of proceedings from the last time this board met, which was last October. Does anyone have any corrections to the minutes or modifications they would like to see made?
I see no hands.
Very good, thank you. Next up, we will take public comment. And folks, this is public comment for any items not on the agenda. We have a couple items that are action items. We will be setting the 2021 harvest specifications. And as I mentioned, Dr. Sweeko will walk us through ER model results. And I know in the past, there have been some public comments there. So I will, before we vote on a final motion for those items, also take public comment on those agenda items. So is there anything not on the agenda that the public would like to comment on?
I don't see any hands, Joe.
Okay, Tony, great, thank you, excellent.
No.
So
Has now raised her hand.
okay. We'll open the floor to you. Thank you.
Hello, good morning, Chair Cimino, members of the Horseshoe Crab Management Board. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. I'm Anna Weinstein. I am the Director of Marine Conservation for Audubon. I'm representing Audubon today. We're also part of the Horseshoe Crab Recovery Coalition, which is a collaboration of scientists, NGOs, and others dedicated to recovering horseshoe crabs on the Atlantic coast by 2030. We submitted a brief letter this morning, and the letter describes that we are dismayed to see a continued lack of recovery of horseshoe crabs in the Delaware Bay survey region since the 1990s that the supplemental materials show, and the decreased relative abundance of horseshoe crabs in 2019 relative to the last 5 years, plus reduced red knot numbers show the adaptive resource management framework is not working to recover horseshoe crabs in the Delaware Bay area. The supplemental materials also described a nearly 50% increase relative to 2018 of estimated coastwide biomedical harvests. So as you know, the red knot, the roofer red knot was listed as threatened under the ESA recently. And we, in our short letter, we list some concrete steps this board must take in order to not just support, but actually allow recovery of the red knot toward delisting criteria that are being established by the Fish and Wildlife Service, and also support the entire marine ecosystem that depends on horseshoe crabs. So I won't run through all those, but we hope that you take a look at the letter, and we look forward to engaging with the board toward recovery of horseshoe crabs by 2030. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anna. And yes, the board will, take a look at those materials. We will be getting an update on the ARM model, and I would open it up if Dr. Suika has any comments on the public comment here. From what I've read, I did see that some of the survey trends look better than the idea that it's all declining. But Caitlin, we'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Joe. So the first item on the agenda is actually going to be presented by John Suika, and that's to consider setting the 2021 harvest specifications. So I will go ahead and let him present on that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Caitlin. Can everybody hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Okay, great. So if can we go to the next slide, please? So I'll be speaking about the adaptive resource management recommendations for harvest of Delaware Bay horseshoe crabs for 2021. And under our adaptive resource management framework, our objective statement is to manage the harvest of horseshoe crabs in the Delaware Bay to maximize harvest, but also maintain ecosystem integrity and provide adequate stopover habitat for migrating shorebirds. And in particular, red knot is our surrogate species for all shorebirds, and the one that we're most concerned with. So red knot so the adaptive resource management model takes into account red knot and horseshoe crab population thresholds, and the input to the annual harvest recommendations are the abundance of both red knots and horseshoe crabs. Within the framework, there are 5 possible harvest packages that we can select from, and annually we make harvest recommendations at this meeting, which will be implemented the following year. Next slide, please. Okay, this table shows the 5 possible harvest packages that could be implemented, and these were adopted back in 2012 when the ARM was accepted for management. The harvest policies or packages range from a complete moratorium of no male and no female harvest up to a maximum of 420,000 males and 210,000 females within a year. Since the ARM framework has been adopted for management, we have been consistently recommending harvest package 3, which is a 500,000 male harvest and 0 female horseshoe crab harvest. The way the optimization program works is that the program looks through all the possible states of populations of both species and different life stages of both species. And then it builds a giant matrix of the combinations of population sizes of red knots and horseshoe crabs, and applies a harvest package to that and calculates the reward of that harvest under each possible state of population for both species. And ultimately, this is how we select the optimal harvest package given our current state of red knots and current state of horseshoe crabs. Next slide, please. The population thresholds that dictate when the harvest of horseshoe crabs has value are based on abundance of both species. The threshold for horseshoe crabs is a female horseshoe crab abundance that is equal to at least 80% of the theoretical carrying capacity of horseshoe crabs, or essentially 11.2 million female horseshoe crabs in the Delaware Bay population. For red knots, the threshold is 81,900 birds. So these thresholds dictate that when the harvest of horseshoe crabs has value, and there is value in female horseshoe crab harvest if either one of these thresholds is met. If the red knots are meeting their threshold, we can safely say that horseshoe crabs aren't limiting red knot population growth and sustainability. If the female horseshoe crabs meet their threshold, we can say that there are plenty of horseshoe crabs, and again, not limiting red knots. Next slide, please. So this graph illustrates the population estimate of red knots stopping over in the Delaware Bay since 2011. You can see it's fluctuated annually, and these annual fluctuations could be due to changes in stopover duration or changes in the proportion of the total red knot population that visits Delaware Bay in a given year. The 2020 estimates were slightly lower than the 2016 to 2019 estimates, but there is greater uncertainty on our 2020 estimate compared to the previous 4 years. 2020 was kind of a unique year in that the abundance of red knots in the bay at a particular point in time during the stopover season was greatest in the first time period. Usually the population that stops over at the bay tends to increase through time and then decrease as the birds eventually continue under migration. But 2020 was kind of a unique year that the greatest number of birds encountered was at the first time period in the stopover. Also in 2020, obviously with the pandemic going on, that impacted some of the resighting ability, which can also contribute to the wider confidence intervals on the estimate for 2020. In 2020, the estimated stopover duration was 10.7 days, which was less than the 12.1 days in 2019. There's a typo on that slide that should say 2020 estimated stopover population or stopover duration, and also the 2020 population was estimated at 40,444 birds, which of course is below the threshold of 81,900 birds, but still within the range that we've seen since 2011. The green line here on the graph just demonstrates the peak aerial counts that are observed each year since 2011, and you can see those have fluctuated somewhat through time as well. Next slide, please. The abundance of horseshoe crabs is assessed from the Virginia Tech Trawl Survey, which is generally conducted in the fall of the year, typically around October. The Virginia Tech Trawl Survey did lose funding for a few years, so between 2012 and 2015, we used a composite index that was correlated to and based on the Delaware 30-foot trawl and New Jersey Delaware Bay Trawl and the New Jersey Ocean Trawl surveys. And we came up with a correlation to the overlapping years with the Virginia Tech Trawl to fill in those missing years. The 2019 estimate in the fall ended up being 4.7 million females. And of course, this is also under the 11.2 million threshold for horseshoe crab abundance. 2019 did show a decrease in abundance from previous years. This is a little bit perplexing. We're not exactly sure why the abundance of horseshoe crabs declined, from 2018 to 2019. But part of the reason may be due to the timing of the Virginia Tech Trawl Survey. In 2019, it was conducted approximately a year or a month earlier than is typically conducted. And a lot of this has to do with, and also, since it was conducted earlier than normal, water temperatures were higher than normal. So that earlier timing of the trawl survey and also the warmer water temperatures may have affected the catchability of the trawl survey. Perhaps, horseshoe crabs hadn't migrated to the coastal waters like they typically do in other years, and just weren't available for the trawl survey to intercept them and capture them. So this is something that we are examining moving forward, is to include the timing of the survey and also water temperature to try to standardize the catches and take into account those possible effects on catchability. In the end, for 2019, we had 4.7 million females and 8.9 million males for our population estimate, which is then carried over to the spring of 2020 when the birds are stopping over in Delaware Bay. Next slide, please. So just a summary table here of horseshoe crab and red knot abundance estimates. For horseshoe crab, 8.9 million males, 4.7 million females. For red knots, 40,444 red knots, both males and females combined. When we put these inputs into the decision matrix that is generated by the ARM optimization routine, the recommended harvest package is consistent with previous years, and that's harvest package number 3 that calls for a harvest of 500,000 males and 0 females. At this time, since both, you can think of it this way, since both of these population estimates for crabs and birds are still below their threshold, there's no value in harvesting females, and no female harvest is recommended at this time. So next slide, please. When we apply our allocation scheme to the recommended total harvest of Delaware Bay origin crabs, it comes out to an allocation of 162,000 male only for Delaware, New Jersey, and for Virginia and Maryland, they are allowed to harvest more males because not all crabs in their state waters are Delaware Bay origin. So for Maryland, it's approximately 256,000 males, and for Virginia, 81,000 males. And no state, can harvest females. So next slide, and I guess with that, I will take any questions that we have on the recommendations for 2021 harvest year.
Excellent. Thank you, John. So we're looking for questions from the board right now. Tony, do we have any hands?
So far, Joe, I don't see any hands. I'll give folks a second. John Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation, John. I was just curious, you mentioned that the Virginia Tech trawl had to trawl a month earlier in 2019. Did you have a chance to look at the other surveys to get horseshoe crabs, the Delaware 30-foot trawl, the New Jersey Delaware Bay trawl? Did they also show similar results, or were they more what you were expecting? Thanks.
Yeah, John, I guess I should have looked at that prior to the meeting here. Off the top of my head, I can't remember exactly how their numbers trended. I don't recall any significant declines like we saw in the Virginia Tech survey. So again, perhaps it is a timing issue and a water temperature issue that affected catchability of Virginia Tech.
Joe, you also have Mike Millard.
Okay, great. Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, John, for the presentation. I think I ask this every year. Embedded in that ARM process in the modeling are 3 competing models that attempt to further explain the relationship between the horseshoe crabs and red knots survival. I'm not going to attempt to characterize those three. You might do it to remind folks, but I'm wondering, after another year of data, are we getting any closer to one of those competing models showing strength, or showing that relationship stronger than the others? Are we learning anything from this process after another year of data? Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that question, Mike. I'll just reiterate the three possible models, governing the population dynamics of red knots are model number one is a no effect model. So red knot abundance and population dynamics are completely independent of horseshoe crab population dynamics. Model number two is what we kind of term the fecundity only model, where horseshoe crabs has an influence on the probability of red knots gaining weight while they're stopped over in the Delaware Bay, and then there's differential fecundity for light versus heavy birds. And then model three is essentially a full effect model where horseshoe crab abundance affects both fecundity and survival of birds that stop over in Delaware Bay. So yeah, are we getting any closer to adding weight to one of the models? That is going to be part of our ongoing update and revision to the ARM framework, which I'll discuss also during this board meeting. So really, right now, the population of red knots has been fairly stable through time. And horseshoe crabs have trended upward, but now have trended downward. So right now, Mike, I'd say the decision on that, have we put more faith in one versus the other two of those red knot models? I would say, stand by, and that'll be something that we'll be examining and discussing as our current ARM revision proceeds.
Joe, you have David Borden as well.
Okay, great. Go ahead, David.
That was me. I've got a question on red knots. Have the governmental agencies that manage it, I think primarily U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, apportioned mortality on red knots and looked at it from the perspective of within the United States versus outside of the United States? And then the related question is, what are the major sources of mortality on the red knot population? Thank you.
Well, I must admit that I'm not a red knot expert, but under the listing document, the listing decision by the Fish and Wildlife Service, the Fish and Wildlife Service has expressed climate change and conditions in the Arctic as possibly one of the major factors influencing red knot populations, but specifically dictating the relative merits of various mortality sources on red knots. I'm probably not the best person to ask that question to.
Thank you.
We have Mike Luisi and Roy Miller.
Okay, go ahead, Mike.
Hey, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the presentation, John. When you were talking about the years when the trawl survey was not in operation, you discussed a composite index that was used to produce an estimate for the horseshoe crab population. Was that just a compilation of other work being done by the states in the surrounding areas, or is that how that estimate was determined?
Yes, we came up with a composite index through a linear mixed random effects model that included those surveys that composite index was then compared to the years when we had overlap with Virginia Tech Trawl Survey and used it to fill in the blanks.
Okay. Yeah. And just a quick follow-up, Mr. Chairman. So I think it would be interesting, given the fact that the trawl survey in 2019 was conducted a month early. I think it would be interesting to see what the results of that, if you would run that modeling like you did the years when the trawl survey didn't operate, and kind of compare those results with what occurred as a result of working a month early. I think it would be an interesting comparison of the model output based on other surrounding work versus the actual work, although it was early. Just wanted to throw that out there as an idea. Thanks.
Yes, that's certainly something we can look at.
Thanks, Mike. That was a good thought. I appreciate that. And sorry, Tony, it slipped my memory. Who's in the queue?
Roy Miller.
Right. Sorry. Go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Two questions for Dr. Suika. That 2019 Virginia Tech Trawl Survey, I didn't catch the reason why it was conducted a month early. Was it strictly because water temperatures were warmer, or was it some issue with the vessel? And the second question is, do you think there will be a trawl survey done this year in 2020? Thanks.
Okay, like any trawl survey, it's when they can get out on the water is weather dependent, and so they anticipate getting out on the water, and of course, being that the survey is conducted in the fall of the year, looking at potential forecasts for hurricane season. It just so happened when they started, weather was apparently pretty decent. They happened to be able to get all the trawls, all the tows in a quicker time period than normal. Other years, the survey, can linger on in through November, given poor weather conditions. So it was just a early start, giving potential forecasts for hurricane season, to try to get the weather, to try to get all the sampling in. Your second question, to answer that, yes, Virginia Tech has funding to conduct a trawl survey this year.
Just to follow up, if I may, I assume that the 2020 survey will go forward as planned, barring any COVID issues. Is that a correct assumption?
That is correct, yes.
Thanks.
Joe, you have Rob LaFront.
Okay, go ahead, Rob.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chair. And just a quick question. Thank you for the presentation. I'm new to this board and learning a lot, so I really appreciate it. Just a quick question, and maybe this is speculative, but I'll ask it anyway. Are there any other reasons we've talked about water temperature as being a potential impact for the downward trend? I'm just wondering whether there are other things we should be keeping our eye open for potential reasons for the downward trend. Thank you.
That's a good question. Like I said, we're examining the timing of the survey and water temperature as a possible reason why there was that decrease in the Virginia Tech catch. Other, possible reasons could be, just overall changes in migration timing of crabs into and out of the bay for whatever reason. But yeah, it's very difficult to say why we saw that decrease. Perhaps it is a decrease in abundance.
Thank you. I appreciate you giving me the time.
There are no other hands raised at this time, Joe. I lied. Hold on. We have two new hands, Chris Wright and Adam Nowalski.
Sure, okay, go ahead, Chris.
Can you hear me now?
We do.
I just wanted to give a little bit more insight into the timing for 2019. When I was issuing the permit, they had requested to start a little earlier for that year because of the New Jersey whelk fishery. So that could be a reason why they moved up and started a little bit earlier. At least that's what I just checked my email. That's what the rationale was, that they were trying to avoid some of those gear conflicts in that area, in certain parts of the area where they were doing the survey.
Okay, well, thank you for that addition. And we have Adam Nowalski.
Great, thank you very much. If you're ready for a motion, I'm prepared to make it.
I think so, Adam, unless Tony, if we have any other hands.
No other hands.
Great, I'd like to go ahead and move to select Harvest Package 3, 500,000 male-only crabs for the 2020 Horseshoe Crab Bait Harvest from Delaware Bay.
Thank you, Adam. And do we have a second to that motion?
We have Roy Miller.
Thank you, Roy. We had some great questions. Is there any discussion on the motion from the board?
I see no hands, Joe.
Very good. Thank you, Tony. As I mentioned, I do want to give the public a chance to comment here. We do have a pretty tight schedule as far as the time to get through this agenda. So if there are any public comments, I would ask that you keep it to 3 minutes. Thank you. Tony, any hands?
Just going to give folks a second to see if they would like to raise their hand. Figure out the hand button. I see no hands raised from the public.
Very good. Thank you. I'm going to ask, are there any objections to this motion?
Joe, no objection, but should it be 2021 or is 2020 correct?
Good.
It should be 2021. Maya, can you correct that typo? Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Maya. All right. Well, with that excellent correction, if there is no objection, then I think we can approve this by consent. And it was a unanimous. And with that, we'll move back to John to hear more about the ARM model itself and the update and revision.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll wait till the slides are up. Okay, we can move on to the next slide. And this will go pretty quick. So last year at the October 9th, 2019 board meeting, the board approved moving forward with a revision of the ARM models. The 2019 stock assessment was approved for management use, and the big advancement in that was the catch multiple survey analysis for horseshoe crabs was peer reviewed and accepted or deemed acceptable to estimate abundance of horseshoe crabs. We also have more than twice the amount of red knot data since the ARM was initiated, and we first started working on this back in 2008. So the bottom line is that we know more now about those species. Next slide. Very briefly, just a synopsis of our terms of reference in the ARM revision, and that is to incorporate the stock assessment model to catch multiple survey analysis into the ARM framework and account for all sources of mortality, which include bait, dead discards, biomedical, and natural mortality. We want to reevaluate the definition of Delaware Bay crabs, update our red knot models given the new information on red knots, and their relationship to horseshoe crabs. We also need to move the model into a new software platform because the previous platform is obsolete and isn't maintained anymore. So we're moving it to a new software that can be updated and continue to be ran. We also are going to be conducting sensitivity runs to compare platforms of the previous model platform and the new model to make sure that we get the same relative answers and optimal harvest decisions. Next slide. So our progress to date, we have been in collaboration with Brian News, who is a University of Georgia Athens postdoc student, and Paul Fackler from NC State to convert the optimization model from ASDP to MDP solve. And Paul Fackler was, he's the one who originated in MDP solve, so he is the expert on that. In April 2020, we had our data workshop, bringing all the information together on horseshoe crabs and red knots. In July of 2020, we had our first assessment workshop where we discussed the replacement of the horseshoe crab stage structure model with the catch multiple survey analysis model to describe the population dynamics of horseshoe crabs and how this would be done. We also refined our dead discard estimation methods with input from additional input from literature and TC members, and we refined our national mortality estimates of horseshoe crabs based on more recent tagging information. Since that time, we've had bi-weekly meetings of a subgroup of the entire ARM work group. This subgroup is specific to modeling and coding of the models in the new platform. Next slide, please. So our future activities, the reanalysis of the red knot tagging data is ongoing by Jim Lyons with USGS. We anticipate by January or February 2021 having our second assessment workshop where all the models will be in their updated forms. By April 2021, a preliminary report completed. May 2021, it will be presented to the Delaware Bay Ecosystem TC and the Horseshoe Crab TC for review. In July, we plan to have our peer review workshop, and then by either the August or October 2021 board meeting, we will present the results of that peer review workshop to the management board, and hopefully it's accepted for management use by that time. Next slide. And I think, that's all. And so I'm happy to take any questions on our current progress and where we're headed.
Great, thank you, Don. Appreciate all the work that you guys are doing, especially digging into any available information on the discards. I know that was a concern with our last assessment, and rightly so. Tony, do we have any hands for questions?
Sorry, Joe. We have John Clark and Bill Hyatt.
Go ahead, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, John. I was just curious, what do you mean by reevaluate the definition of Delaware Bay crabs?
So that was a term of reference. I mean, there's always been some discussion as to, when the farther away from the mouth of Delaware Bay you get, what proportion of those crabs are truly Delaware Bay origin crabs. And we've defaulted to the definition of Delaware Bay origin crabs are crabs that could potentially spawn within Delaware Bay during some portion of their life. We know that there's mixing of populations both to the north and to the south, and we've looked at tagging information on how crabs migrate. We've looked at genetic information on how populations in various areas along the coast are related, and kind of a spoiler alert: not much is going to change. Essentially, the Delaware Bay population is the area that is sampled by the Virginia Tech Trawl Survey, and it's given the most recent genetic information and tagging information, it is reaffirming that when that Virginia Tech Trawl Survey was originally set up, they had a good idea of what were really Delaware Bay crabs. And so that is essentially going to be our population of interest.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Sorry, was it Bill Hyatt next?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. This is a question for John, and it doesn't have to do specifically with the information that he just presented, but it is a follow-up to some discussion that took place at previous meetings. I think a year ago, the question was raised regarding the egg densities, crab egg densities on Keys and Boone Beach, and some those densities are going down over time and may have be decoupled from our index estimates of the number of female crabs. And at that time, you responded that there was some problems with that egg density data relative to the methodology being used to collect it and the time series information that was available, and the fact that actually different methods were being used to collect it in different areas. And my question this time around is there any research that you're aware of underway to improve the methodology being used to monitor egg densities, or to identify a better methodology to be applied? Or is there any research underway to better explore and understand the relationship between female crab numbers and ultimate egg densities that are produced? And the assumption here is that while there may be a relationship between the number of female crabs and red knots, the direct link is in effect the eggs that are deposited on the beach and the energy source that they represent to the birds. So thank you.
Yes, there still are egg surveys being conducted in New Jersey, and universities and other NGOs are refining the methods that are being used in collecting the egg density data. Those methods in the past, as you mentioned, in the past there were differences in methodology between New Jersey and Delaware. Delaware is no longer doing any egg surveys, but they are still being conducted on the New Jersey side of the bay. Methods are continually being refined by those stakeholders that are still interested in the egg density data. Hopefully, with more refinement of those methods, it's additional information that we can still examine and look at to see how it correlates with abundance estimates of horseshoe crabs. But one of the problems with egg density data, and will always be a problem, is it's the number of eggs that you collect and count on a beach is not only a function of horseshoe crabs, but it's also a function of the weather conditions prior to when those eggs were sampled. Wind and wave action will obviously influence the density of eggs, especially the density of eggs in the surface sediment that are actually available to shorebirds. So it's something that we we'll still continue to keep an eye on and monitor. Whether or not that would supplant a direct linkage to abundance of horseshoe crabs remains to be seen. And in our modeling and estimation within the ARM framework, the new analysis of bird tagging data, if we can have a direct link or make that link between abundance of horseshoe crabs, the timing of their spawning, and possible weight gain and survival of red knots, that's actually an easier avenue to go down, because we have more confidence in our estimates of horseshoe crab abundance than what we would in egg density, given all those environmental factors that could influence egg density on a beach at a given point in time in a particular year.
Very good. Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Bill. Tony, any other hands?
Sorry. Excuse me. Chris Wright has his hand up.
Right, sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Addition, some of the materials that we had, I think it was noted that 118,000 roughly crabs were caught or were caught in the biomedical mortality. And I was wondering what percentage of those 118,000 were female crabs?
That would be a question for Caitlin. If we can give that data out publicly, I'm not sure.
Sorry, could you repeat the question? I was having a sidebar.
There was 118,000 plus crabs that were caught, or the mortality rate was slated at 118,000 or estimated at 118,000. I was wondering how many of those were female crabs, because it wasn't really specified and I couldn't recall.
Yeah, it's not specified, and I would have to go back to the data given to us by the biomedical facilities to sort that out. So I don't have the answer in front of me right now.
Okay, thank you, because it was up a little bit higher this year compared to previous years, and so I was just wondering if there was a little bit more female mortality, at least in last year. But anyway, we can follow up later.
Very good. Thank you, Chris. Sorry, Tony, any other hands?
No additional hands, Joe.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you again, John. So with that, our next agenda item is consider approval for the fishery management plan review and state compliance from 2019 fishing year, and that's over to you, Caitlin.
Maya, could you pull that up? Thanks. So we are running a little bit behind, so I'm going to try and condense this. So next slide, please. This is the management history. We've had 7 addenda since the FMP was approved in 1998, and those are listed here. And for time, I will skip to the next slide. And this table, or sorry, figure shows the coastwide bait harvest, biomedical collections, and estimated biomedical mortality over time. Coastwide bait harvest declined following the establishment of the FMP, and it's remained fairly stable since about 2004. And then similarly, coastwide biomedical only collections and estimated mortality have been fairly consistent since 2010, with some increases in the last few years. Next slide. And then in 2019, the bait landings totaled 660,091 crabs. And that number does exclude unreported landings from Massachusetts and confidential landings from Rhode Island. And of the states that reported those 2019 landings, New York, Delaware, and Virginia contributed the most, and they account for 73% of the total when combined. The total landings equate to about 42% of the coastwide ASMFC quota, which is 1.59 million pounds or crabs. But again, that number is likely higher when you account for Massachusetts. And then Delaware did exceed their adjusted state quota for 2019 by 5,014 crabs, and therefore they reduced their quota for 2020 to account for that overage. Next slide. So the biomedical only crabs that were collected in 2019 totaled 748,376 crabs, which is a 46% increase from 2018 collections. And the biomedical only mortality estimate for 2019 is only, is 102,758 crabs. And this number includes the reported number of crabs observed dead before bleeding, plus 15% of the reported number of biomedical only crabs bled. And that total biomedical mortality estimate represents 15% of the total directed removals in 2019, with that total including biomedical mortality and bait harvest. And the biomedical mortality in 2019 does exceed the biomedical mortality threshold of 57,000 crabs that was established in the FMP. Next slide. So for horseshoe crab, the states that qualify and requested de minimis were in jurisdictions were PRFC, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida, and they all meet that criteria set in the FMP. New Jersey also meets the criteria, but it does not request de minimis status. Next slide. And in this year's review, the plan review team has continued to recommend that long-term funding be established for the Virginia Tech Trawl Survey, which is currently funded through 2021. The PRT found that all states appear in compliance with the requirements of the FMP, and they recommend approval of the FMP review, state compliance reports, and de minimis requests. However, they did note some concern regarding New York's bait harvest, which increased by 25% in 2019, despite the poor stock status in that region. So the PRT recommends that the board make an effort to encourage and monitor actions for the New York region that would improve the population trends. The PRT also notes that the biomedical mortality threshold has been exceeded in 2019, which requires the board to consider management action. And then lastly, the PRT recommends the board consider efforts to annually characterize dead discard removals in other fisheries. And specifically, they're calling for increasing access to and use of data from the Northeast Fishery Observer Program. And that would allow for improved monitoring and estimation of discard mortality. And next slide. So that's brief summary of the FMP review, and I can take any questions.
Yeah, excellent job, Kim. And you know, we are looking for a motion here, and we are running late, but that was a lot of information. So are there any questions from the board?
We have two hands up, Tom Fody and then Mike Luisi.
Thank you. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, can you refresh my memory if this is if this is the first time or this is a trend with the biomedical industry by going over?
Thanks, Tom. This is the 12th year in the last 13 years that the biomedical mortality estimate exceeded that threshold. And previously in the stock assessment, it was found that the levels that were occurring prior to 2019 did not appear to be having a significant negative impact on the stock. So just noting that the level this year in last year did increase from that level before. But yes, it is a trend in the past years.
Thank you. Follow up, Tom? Nope. Okay.
I mean, I'm looking at this trend over the years. You know, we require the states to stay in compliance. The biomedical is supposed to be good partners, but they need to stay in compliance. And we've let them slide for 12 years in a row. Maybe we need to take some action.
Okay, well, we'll look to the board members if there's interest. And you know, I have had some conversations with staff, and you know, we have some ideas on discussions that need to be run through our technical committee first. We have Mike Luisi.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Based on your request, I have a motion if you're ready for that.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
All right, I'd move to approve the FMP review for the 2019 fishing year, state compliance reports, and de minimis status for Potomac River Fisheries Commission, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Malcolm Rhodes.
Thank you, Dr. Rhodes. Any discussion on this?
So you had two additional hands come up, Maureen Davidson and Bill Hyatt. It was before Mike made the motion, but it might.
Right. Okay, well, you know, let's, if there are further questions, and we'll go to Maureen, you know, we can I think wrap them into this discussion. Go ahead, Maureen.
Thank you. I just wanted to respond to some of the comments I made concerning the assessments findings for New York, where we had the decrease in abundance. For 2020, New York State did take further management efforts in response to the decrease in abundance for horseshoe crabs. We did harvest closures around the last moon in May and the first moon in June, And we also decreased the daily trip limit during that peak spawning period. Now, obviously, this went into effect in 2020, and the effects of that have not been seen. Unfortunately, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we're concerned that our harvest for horseshoe crabs for this year are not really going to be normal as they would have been in a normal year. But I just wanted to say that New York State has taken steps in response to the decline of to the noted decline of horseshoe crabs in our local waters. Thank you.
Thank you very much for speaking up. That's important information for the board. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to speak briefly in support of the comment that Tom Foti made. I understand that the stock assessment determined that the previous overages were not affecting the population significantly, but the increase to 2020, the last increase, was very significant. And I think regardless of whether or not there's a decision made to take action, we at least need to have some assessment done as to whether or not that increase is significant. Thank you.
I don't disagree at all. And in the interest of time, as I said, I've begun those discussions with staff. And I think for our next board meeting, we will have, some report out from the technical committee or the plan review team. Okay, thank you. So to the motion, are there any other hands, Tony?
No other hands.
Very good. Okay. Is there any opposition to this motion?
I see no hands in opposition.
That sounds good to me. So we'll consider the approval of the FMP review for 2019 as unanimous. And that brings us to, we have a AP nomination. So the advisory panel, and Tina, if you could run us through that quickly. Thank you.
Tina, we don't hear you.
Apologies. Sorry about that. Yes, I would offer for the board's consideration the following. Oh, I just lost it. Here we go. Christina Lecker, in addition to the Horseshoe Crab Advisory Panel, she is a biomedical representative from the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Okay, thank you. And that information is in the board materials. Do we have a motion?
Pat Gear.
Go ahead, Pat.
And a seconder by Mel Bell.
Okay.
Thank you, Mel. Pat, I think we're good unless there was anything you wanted to add.
Yeah, I was muted. I just, I talked to Ms. Lecker a couple of times. She's the plant manager of Fuji Waco Chemical U.S. Corporation. And, she's been there for a number of years, and they've been bleeding horseshoe crabs since about 2002. From my discussions with her, I think she'd be an excellent representative to the panel, representing the Eastern Shore and Virginia, Maryland, Delmarva area as well for biomedical.
Okay, thanks. I'm gonna go ahead.
Sorry, I wasn't sure that the motion got read out loud, so I wanted to make sure that we did that.
Much appreciated. I can do that. This is a motion to appoint Christina Lecker to the Horseshoe Crab Advisory Panel. Motion was made by Pat Gear and seconded by Mel Bell. Is there any opposition to this motion?
I see no hands raised.
Very good. We'll consider that approved by consent. And I believe that wraps us up. I apologize for running this a little late. We had some great questions for Dr. Suika, though, and I think that was important for us all to hear. With that, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Yes, Pat Gear.
Pat again, thank you. We are adjourned, and Tony, sorry to run us late.